He paid for a first-class seat, but the airline saw a black man and told him, "That's not for you." 45 minutes later, they were begging him to stay. Marcus Johnson had done everything right. He arrived at the airport 2 hours early, dressed sharp in a tailored navy blue suit, with a clean shave and polished shoes. His briefcase held a laptop, a folder of signed contracts, and the hopes of a major deal waiting for him in New York. Marcus wasn't just a businessman. He was the CEO of one of the fastest-growing tech startups in the country. He had paid full price for a first-class ticket, booked well in advance. But none of that seemed to matter when he stepped into the boarding line. As he approached the first-class gate, a uniformed airline staff member looked him over and frowned. "Sir, are you sure you're in the right line?" she asked, her tone polite but doubtful. Marcus replied calmly, "Yes, I'm in Tua." He handed her his boarding pass. She scanned it, glanced at him again, and then looked confused. After a moment, she waved over another staff member, whispered something quietly. Then the second staffer turned to Marcus and said, "I'm sorry, there seems to be a mistake. You'll need to wait over there while we sort this out." Passengers behind him began to shuffle and stare. Some leaned in to listen. Marcus could feel the judgment in their eyes, not because he had done anything wrong, but because they couldn't believe someone like him was flying first class. No one apologized, no one explained. Minutes later, a gate agent returned and said flatly, "We've reassigned your seat. You'll be in 26B just like that." Marcus was moved to economy. No refund, no reason. And as he walked down the aisle to the back of the plane, the message was loud and clear. They didn't see a CEO, they only saw a black man. By the time the plane touched down. Marcus turned his phone back on without thinking much of it. He expected a few replies, maybe some support from friends, but what he saw stunned him. His screen lit up with hundreds of notifications flooding in, faster than he could scroll. His post had exploded. Tens of thousands of likes, shares, and comments had poured in while he was in the air. People from all over the country and even outside it were responding with outrage, support, and disbelief. Celebrities were reposting it. Influential business leaders were calling it out. News reporters were already tagging the airline in tweets demanding answers. Marcus stared at the screen, feeling a wave of shock, then silence. His words had hit a nerve. It wasn't just about him anymore, it was about something bigger. His experience had become a mirror, showing how bias and quiet racism still live in everyday places, like an airport gate or a plane aisle. Meanwhile, the airline's headquarters was in full panic. Their brand was being dragged online. Thousands of angry customers were calling their support line. Others were canceling tickets. Investors were starting to ask questions. Their name was trending for all the wrong reasons. PR teams rushed to draft statements. Senior executives were in emergency meetings. And Marcus. He wasn't celebrating, he was tired. All he had wanted was to get from one city to another with dignity. But instead, he had become a symbol. He sat in his hotel room later that night, scrolling through thousands of comments, unsure what to say next. But one thing was clear, people were listening. The world had seen what happened, and now it was waiting to see what he would do next. Marcus sat down in seat 26B, his knees pressed against the seat in front of him, the armrest barely wide enough for comfort. Around him, people settled in with headphones and snacks, uninterested in what had just happened. He looked out the window, not saying a word. He wasn't angry, not yet, but there was a weight in his chest, the kind that comes from being reminded, once again, that success doesn't always protect you from ignorance. He had built something from nothing, hired people, paid taxes, spoken at universities, and still, to some, he was just another face they didn't trust in the front of the plane. He pulled out his phone and opened his social media app. He wasn't planning to make a shine, but he couldn't let this go silently either. His fingers began to move. Booked a first-class seat. Airline staff said, "I didn't look like I belonged there." No apology, no explanation. Just moved me to the back of the plane. For those asking why we still talk about race, this is why. He read it twice. It wasn't emotional, just facts. Then he hit post. The plane door closed. He put his phone on airplane mode and leaned back into the cramped seat, letting out a long breath. What he didn't know was that, in those few minutes before takeoff, his post had already begun to travel faster than the plane ever could. Asterisk back at the gate, someone refreshed their timeline and gasped, then shared it, then another and another. While Marcus sat silently in the air, unaware, the ground below was catching fire. What started as a quiet moment of dignity was turning into something the airline would soon be forced to face. Asterisk the next morning. Marcus woke up to a dozen missed calls and even more emails. The airline had responded overnight with a public apology, calling it a misunderstanding and promising to investigate the incident. But people weren't buying it. The comments under their post were brutal. No one wanted it carefully. Written statements, they wanted accountability. Behind the scenes, the airline's representatives were now trying to contact Marcus directly. They offered him an upgraded membership, a full refund, and a year of free flights. A senior executive even requested a private meeting to make things right. Asterisk, but Marcus didn't respond. He knew the drill. He'd seen it before. Something bad happens. People get loud, the company says sorry, and then everything goes back to normal. But this time felt different, because this time people were still talking. And not just about him, but about how often things like this happen to people who don't have a platform. Asterisk, later that evening, Marcus made another post. Just a few lines. Asterisk, I don't want free flights. I want training for your staff. I want you to see us before you judge us. I want the next young black boy flying for the first time to feel like he belongs wherever he's sitting. Asterisk, that post hit even harder. It was shared more than the first one. News anchors read it out loud on national television. Activists, athletes, teachers, parents, they all echoed the same message. This wasn't about first class. It was about respect, asterisk, and the airline. They realized an apology wouldn't fix this, because Marcus hadn't just told his story, he had started a conversation that no one could ignore anymore. Asterisk, in the days that followed, the momentum didn't slow down, it grew. Other passengers began sharing their own experiences of quiet discrimination. Stories of being followed in stores, questioned at hotels, doubted at job interviews. Marcus's post had opened a door, and now thousands were walking through it. Under pressure from the public and the media, the airline didn't just apologize again, they acted. They announced mandatory bias and diversity training for all employees. They created a partnership with community leaders to develop long-term programs focused on inclusion, fairness, and respect. And for the first time in its history, the airline invited an outside speaker to address its top leadership, Team Marcus Johnson. Asterisk, when Marcus stepped into that boardroom weeks later, it wasn't as a victim, but as a voice. He stood tall in front of the very people who once looked through him, and calmly said, "If you want to fix this, you don't need to cover it up. You need to face it and do better." Asterisk, that moment was bigger than a flight, a seat, or a ticket. It was about rewriting the rules of how people are treated, no matter where they come from or what they look like. Asterisk, Marcus didn't stop there. He launched a foundation to support young entrepreneurs from underrepresented communities, giving them access to tools and mentorship he never had. His experience, once painful and humiliating, had turned into purpose. Asterisk, and while the world didn't change overnight, something had shifted. A conversation had begun. A system had been challenged. A man had taken his seat not just on a plane, but in history. Asterisk, because when they tried to move him to the back, they didn't realize Marcus was always meant to lead from the front. Asterisk,